Welcome to today's edition of the Practitioner's Problem of Practice, a part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Chad.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Randy. And who else do we have here, Chad?
Well, we have a guest with us today, and her name is Pam Dobson. And Pam, go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Pam Dobson, and I'm a technology integration specialist. And I've been working in this role for about 10 years. So I'm really excited to be part of the conversation today and to weigh in with my 2 cents.
We're so excited to have you here with us. And again, we love learning from one another and especially from our practitioner friends. So in each of these episodes, we are going to discuss a practitioner-based challenge and try to explore it through a human-centered lens. So our goal here, is to bring human-centered design to all of our work. And so these conversations are intended to ground us in the practical work that happens in our schools and to bring our compass points into focus around these questions. So we've invited Pam this week, and she is going to share a question that she has, and then we'll spend some time discussing it. Go ahead, Pam.
So I've been really thinking a lot about some of the give and take, some of the push and pull, some of the competing forces that exist in public education. And I mostly have been thinking about this on a national and state level when we talk about some of the current political climate around school curriculums that are in the news. And I'm sure that I could say CRT without being kicked off of your show, but some of this, fear or hysteria that exists and how quickly states, districts, and even, I'm hoping not, at a federal level, we quickly institute policies or procedures that sometimes can dehumanize some of the work that we do inside of schools. So I figured I'd throw that out there. I'm thinking most recently about the PA House bill, and I'm forgetting the numbers, but I think you guys could help me fill in the details there. Requiring schools to post curriculums online and how quickly school districts have been sort of gathering around school board meetings to pass similar policies for additional resources, supplemental resources, or curriculums so that they can be viewed by the public. So I'm wondering, what our thoughts are.
Who has some thoughts that you'd like to jump in?
So I'll start from like the 35,000 foot level. And I think that, whether we're talking about the specific issue that you mentioned, Pam, or just a general contentious issue in general, I think if we want to approach it from a human-centered perspective, it has to include curiosity and conversation. That if these problems were created by people and they're going to be solved by people, but they're going to be solved by people who are working hard to try and understand what the opposition is and approach it from a curiosity perspective, as opposed to, I think, some of the things that we see now is we immediately get emotional and we want to get angry and we want to start attacking and we want to start name calling. And I think that's dangerous because that is just a spiral down to more of the same. And I think we need leaders, and that includes anybody, not just somebody with a title, to sort of put the brakes on it, pull back a little bit, show some curiosity and some vulnerability, and really be more human around that issue. Easier said than done, but I think that is the entry point that we have to have. So I'm curious, anyone want to push back on that?
No, I mean, when I think about the compass points and I think about the role of the curator, which is to, always really question and collect feedback, I think there is a part of, like, take the issue of posting curriculum online. I think that there are probably more districts than not who already have that in some form. And so, the House bill that requires that, despite the fact that the intention behind that is I'll be somewhat cynical about the intention behind that. There are places where we're already pretty transparent about what's in our curriculum. And so how might we meet the feedback that we're getting from our stakeholders around that transparency? So, in a place where you might have a curriculum mapping framework and you can search by keyword, and when those keywords don't come up, how do we help our stakeholders to understand, what really is in place or isn't in place? And I've always said, fair or unfair, that we don't do a great job in public education of telling our stories. And so when you don't tell a story, the gaps get filled really quickly. That absence of storytelling allows other people's to create it. So when I think about the storytelling part of our compass point, the ability to tell many stories. So there is a narrative that's being told about public education right now. And part of that has been, whether we'll admit it or not, if we're being honest, our unwillingness to tell better stories about the work that we do.
Mm.
I know Rachel's dying to say something. Come on, Rachel.
I think it's important to ask questions and to be curious. I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for the part of the conversation when you're curious and curious and curious, and then you hit the line that just hurts. Like the emotions are just there, and it's not like there isn't a place to keep asking questions. I think that sometimes we ask questions because we think at some point we're going to get to something that we can understand. And I think in the vast majority of situations, that's true. But I think in some of the conversations, that's not true. And you're going to get to a wall of some sort. And I think the part that's really hard is you are curious, you ask questions, you're transparent, you are trying to place humans at the center of the work that you're doing and the planning that you're doing. And then you find there's a district in our area right now where you have a teacher who is getting questioned by parents for a post in her classroom that was meant to be open and accepting for all. And instead it has been sort of questioned and demonized. And there is a real line to it that gets really hard past the curiosity point where I don't have a great answer to that. It's hard. I think I agree. We want to try not to be emotional, but I think that there are the lines that we hit that are. And I don't know what to do with that, genuinely.
Well, I think one thing that I would, I guess my curiosity is, are we willing to dig deep into what the root cause of that is? So I would say that we end up being really polarized around the assumptions that the people who are against a teacher having a poster up in their classroom and again, I have the same reaction to you, Rachel, their right is right. And why is this a thing? It's not political. Wanting everybody to be included is the right. We should want that for people, right? I think the danger is that there are tons of opinions from both ends of the spectrum that get discounted when we see the world through the people who want that poster down in the classroom only want it because they want to destroy public education, and anybody who's different. There is a way that sometimes the curiosity around the polarization doesn't feel very good. But at the individual level, when that person one-on-one comes and says, I don't believe in that, being curious around the one-on-one perspective, the human perspective, is probably more where I would say that's easier than it is to be curious about this whole movement, which feels so antithetical, if that's the right word, to what my personal beliefs are. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd push us to see the empathy and the humanity and the wanting to understand at a human level, one-on-one, in conversation with people, as opposed to maybe trying to understand and lump everyone in to one side of that conversation. I don't know if that feels any better to anybody else. Pam, obviously, please jump in, or whoever.
Yeah, I'm thinking a couple of things. I'm thinking a lot about connecting Randy's idea to a little bit of the sadness I hear from Rachel, when you continue to ask questions, but maybe you're not getting to the heart of what you feel like is truly there. I'm also thinking a lot about reactions and emotions and the divisiveness, and how we maybe need to put the relationships that we have in our community before we can solve the problems that we have in our schools. So I'm thinking a little bit about, I'm thinking a lot about school board meetings in general, right? We've seen how hot they've become, and we've seen just the madness that's ensued because there's not really human beings talking to each other. And I'm thinking about Robert's rules. I'm thinking about the order. I'm thinking about the power in that room. And I'm thinking about the distrust that we've had or that has been cultivated from people not being heard, whether you're on one side or the other, right? This sort of these systems that perpetuate people feeling like they're on one side or the other. And I feel like you can see that in our current political climate. I feel like you can feel that when parents come or community members come and speak at school board meetings, right? Somebody feels out of control. And I think that Randy's spot on by talking about how all of that talk is really emotional energy. And I also hear Rachel saying, and you could ask as many questions as you want, but that emotional, maybe some of those questions don't address the emotional energy. And I'm wondering if it's because we're not finding common ground, or if there's a way to find common ground at this point without some serious conversation. So I'm sort of wondering, I'm thinking about some of these big ideas, and I'm thinking like, in what other ways do district policies or procedures or some of the traditional values that we have in public education, how maybe does that create division where people can't see the humanity on either side because we're missing common ground? I don't know, I'm just sort of reframing something, I guess, as we're talking.
And I think the idea of missing common ground brings me to another question, and that is, where else inside or outside of education do we see these kinds of behaviors being modeled? I think that's sort of a social issue that we have right now, is that our leaders from the top, the highest positions on down, are not modeling human kind of interactions. They're modeling this butting of heads and being angry and emotional and demonizing and dehumanizing the other side, and that's what people see. And we need some people at all levels, whether it be in the school board room or in the Congress, to step up and plant the stake in the ground and just say, like, we need to change this and act that out. So we have more role models and it becomes normalized, because I think it has, what we see now has become normalized in a negative way. Go ahead, Chad.
No, and I was just, when I think about it contextually, at the classroom level with parents and teachers, or when I think it at a district level with, parents and boards and things like that, again, easier said than done. I go back to the kind of fight or flight. There doesn't seem to be another option. So what happens is, when parents are angry and upset and they come to a board, they can sometimes be dismissed. And Pam, you mentioned Robert's rules, right? So, a school board during public comment really it's not intended to interact with the public. And I think where Rachel and I are probably very much in agreement, but then at the same time see it through different lenses, is, there is a reason why parents feel disconnected from the school. And even though we as educators oftentimes say, well, we invite them to parent conferences, we send home things constantly, we send home surveys, we do all these things, and they don't want to be involved. And then they show up at our school board meetings wanting to know the curriculum, and we've made it available. Those things are probably all true. At the same time, as a root cause, there are people who are not politically far right or politically far left who don't feel connected or seen or heard within our system. And when we dismiss everybody, we then lose sight of the fact that there are people who genuinely just don't know how. And I always point out when I work with districts that there is a difference between involvement and engagement. And that oftentimes as practitioners, we say we want our parents engaged when really what we want is we want them involved. We want them to pull their weight, make sure the homework book is signed, make sure that they're turning assignments in on time. But when they come to the school and say, you're not supporting my child or servicing my child in a way that they need, we're very quick to dismiss that because we're defensive. And so I'm not as ready to dismiss the craziness, although I do think a lot of it is rooted in some pretty nefarious things. I think if we dismiss everybody as that, we lose sight of the fact that we probably don't do a very good job of authentically hearing, seeing, and valuing our parents and our community as much as we should.
Well, I think this has been a really good conversation, especially to kick off this series, because it's taking a very real issue that exists now, a problem of practice, and lets us sort of slice and dice it through this concept of the human school compass.
I'm wondering real quickly before we wrap up, does anybody have like a question that they would want to throw out for our viewers that for them to think about as it relates to, this topic or anything in general? Anything that anyone's rising to the top?
I think one of the things that I think about a lot is how we create space for those conversations. I think that going along with what Pam said about there's not the back and forth at a school board meeting, because that's not really what that's for. But I think often what happens in situations where districts are being questioned, the response often is fear, panic, and then total shutdown. And then there's still no conversation. So I wonder how we create spaces that are designed for those conversations and encourage the genuine curiosity as opposed to the anger, to be able to hear one another. Because I would suspect, nefarious or not, at the base level for most parents, it comes down to fear. Right. And that's a universal thing that we can understand. So how can we make space to have those conversations while encouraging ourselves and each other to treat each other as human beings in those conversations?
I love it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And I'd like to just say thank you so much to Pam, and thank you for those of you watching at home for learning alongside us in this edition of the Human Schools Practitioner's Problem of Practice. If you have a problem of practice or a question that you'd like us to consider, or even come in and discuss with us just like Pam has done, please ask it in our community Facebook group. Visit thehuman.school and the Learning in Public Hub for additional resources, and please join our conversation in our Facebook community committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. Thanks so much for the conversation tonight, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.